8-year-old boy calls 911 to arrest her stepfather after hearing her mother scream. When the police arrive, the scene they witness shocked the entire crew. Nathan Lewis clutched his astronomy book tighter to his chest as the muffled sounds of his stepfather's footsteps echoed from the basement below. It was the third time Dennis had gone down there tonight, and each time he'd been careful to lock the door behind him. 8-year-old Nathan had long since memorized the distinct click of that old brass lock, a sound that had become increasingly common in their modest two-story home on Willow Street. Outside his bedroom window, the Boston skyline twinkled against the November darkness. His digital clock glowed 9:47 p.m., well past his bedtime, but sleep refused to come. His mother Julia wouldn't be home from her night shift at Boston Memorial Hospital for at least another hour. These solitary evenings with Dennis in the house had become a strange exercise in invisibility. Nathan had learned it was easier to stay quiet in his room, surrounded by his books and the glow-in-the-dark stars his mother had helped him stick on the ceiling last Christmas. "One day you'll be an astronomer," she told him, her tired eyes crinkling at the corners when she smiled. "You see things other people miss." Nathan did see things, like how Dennis checked his phone constantly, or how the basement had gradually transformed from a family storage space to a forbidden zone, or how his mother's smile had become strained since marrying Dennis Matthews 18 months ago. The sound of the basement door opening again drifted up the stairs. Nathan quietly slipped off his bed and padded to his bedroom door, opening it just enough to peek through. From this vantage point, he could see a sliver of the hallway and the top of the staircase leading down to the main floor. Dennis emerged from the basement, a large duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He locked the door with practiced precision before checking his watch. His movements were controlled, economical, nothing like the expansive gestures he used when Julia was around. This Dennis, the real Dennis, Nathan thought, moved like a different person altogether. The doorbell rang, startling both Nathan and, judging by his jerk of surprise, Dennis as well. Nathan quickly closed his door to a crack, his heart suddenly pounding against his ribs. "You're early," he heard Dennis say as the front door opened. The visitor's response was too low to catch, but Dennis's reply came clearly. "Everything's counted and ready. But we need to be quick. She gets home around 11. The way Dennis said she made Nathan's stomach twist. He'd never heard his stepfather refer to his mother with such cold detachment. Quiet conversation continued downstairs, punctuated by the sound of zippers and rustling paper. Nathan wanted to see who was there, but he dared not venture from the relative safety of his room. After what seemed like forever but was probably only 10 minutes, the front door opened and closed again. Silence settled over the house once more. Nathan returned to his bed, pulling his space-themed comforter up to his chin even though he wasn't cold. He reached for his notebook, a blue composition book his mother had bought him for important observations, as she called them. With a stubby pencil, he wrote, "November 12th, Dennis went to basement 3X tonight. Visitor came at 9:52, left with duffel bag at 10:05. The notebook contained similar entries dating back nearly 2 months. Nathan wasn't entirely sure why he kept this record, but something about Dennis's behavior made him uneasy. His real dad, before moving to Seattle 3 years ago, had taught him that when something doesn't feel right, you should pay attention. Headlights swept across his ceiling as a car pulled into their driveway, and Nathan felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. Mom was home early. He glanced at his clock. 10:41 p.m. Downstairs, he heard Dennis moving quickly, probably arranging himself in his usual position on the living room couch with the television on, creating the impression he'd been there all evening. Nathan had witnessed this transformation many times. Dennis shape-shifting from secretive stranger to attentive husband in the time it took Julia to walk from the car to the front door. The sound of his mother's key in the lock was followed by her familiar call, "I'm home." Nathan considered going downstairs to greet her. She always seemed happy to see him even when exhausted from her 12-hour shifts as a pediatric nurse. But something held him back. An instinct told him to wait, to listen. "Hey, babe, you're early." Dennis's voice carried its public warmth now. "Margaret came in to relieve me. I was dead on my feet." His mother's voice sounded weary. The new electronic charting system has everyone working overtime. Poor thing. I've got a glass of wine waiting for you. Footsteps moved toward the kitchen, followed by the familiar domestic sounds of his mother setting down her purse and kicking off her shoes. Nathan could picture her routine perfectly, hanging her coat on the wooden peg by the door, running a hand through her dark blonde hair, released from its work ponytail. Thanks for the wine. Is Nathan asleep? Hasn't made a peep all night. Good kid. Nathan frowned at the casual lie. Dennis had checked on him exactly 0 times that evening. I'm gonna peek in on him, then maybe take a hot shower. My shoulders are killing me. Nathan quickly lay down and closed his eyes, pretending to be asleep. Moments later, his door creaked open, and he felt his mother's gentle presence. She quietly approached his bed and leaned down to kiss his forehead. Her familiar scent of hospital hand sanitizer and the vanilla lotion she always kept in her purse enveloping him. He kept his breathing deep and even. "Sweet dreams, my little astronomer," she whispered before quietly pulling his door nearly closed, leaving it open just a crack the way he preferred. Nathan listened as her footsteps retreated down the hallway. The shower started running, and he relaxed again, contemplating whether to actually try sleeping now. His mother was home, which meant the strange nighttime activities would stop. Tomorrow was Saturday, which meant pancakes for breakfast and maybe a trip to the public library if his mom wasn't too tired. He was drifting towards sleep when a sound jolted him fully awake, the distinct click of the basement door being unlocked. Nathan sat up, instantly alert. Why would his mother be going to the basement? Dennis had made it clear months ago that the basement was his home office now, for his work as a medical supplies distributor. The shower was still running. Nathan slid out of bed again, compelled by curiosity stronger than caution. He crept to his bedroom door and peered out just in time to see Julia, wrapped in her blue bathrobe, disappearing down the basement stairs. She must have forgotten something in the laundry room, he reasoned, which occupied one corner of the basement. Dennis was nowhere in sight, probably still in the living room watching TV. Nathan hesitated only briefly before slipping into the hallway. The house was quiet except for the muffled sound of the shower and the low murmur of the television downstairs. He moved silently toward the basement door, which stood partially open. Nathan was halfway down the main staircase when he heard it, a sound that would permanently divide his life into before and after. His mother's scream tore through the quiet house, primal and terrified. It was followed by the crash of something heavy falling. What the hell is all this? Julia's voice was almost unrecognizable, strangled with shock. Dennis! Dennis! Heavy footsteps thundered from the living room toward the basement. Nathan flattened himself against the wall of the staircase, his heart hammering so loudly he was certain it would give him away. Julia, wait! I can explain. Dennis's voice was urgent, desperate in a way Nathan had never heard before. Explain? Explain. Another crash echoed from below. There are drugs down here, and, oh my God, are these MY prescription pads? My hospital ID badge? What have you done? Nathan could barely breathe. His mother's words weren't making sense, yet the terror in her voice was unmistakable. Keep your voice down. The kid is sleeping, Dennis hissed. Don't you dare tell me to keep my voice down in my own home. You've been what? Stealing from the hospital? Using MY credentials? Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To my career? To our life? The argument escalated, voices overlapping in a terrifying cacophony. Something else crashed, followed by the sound of a struggle. You're not calling anyone, Dennis growled, his voice suddenly dangerous. Just shut up and listen to me for a second. Let go of me. Nathan had heard enough. With shaking hands, he retreated up the stairs and back to his room, closing the door quietly behind him. His mother's cell phone lay on his desk where she'd left it earlier that day after taking photos of his science project. He grabbed it, fingers trembling as he dialed the number every child knows by heart but hopes never to use. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady, nothing like the chaos unfolding downstairs. I think my stepdad is hurting my mom, Nathan whispered, surprised by how small his own voice sounded. She's screaming. I'm scared. What's your name, sweetheart? Nathan. Nathan Lewis. And your address, Nathan? 317 Willow Street, Boston. The gray house with blue shutters. You're doing great, Nathan. Are you somewhere safe right now? I'm in my bedroom. They're in the basement. Is there anyone else in the house? No, just us. Okay, Nathan. Officers are on their way right now. Can you stay on the line with me? Nathan nodded, then remembered to speak. Yes. Good. Now, can you tell me what happened before you called? Nathan swallowed hard. My mom came home from work. She's a nurse. She went to take a shower, but then she went to the basement instead. Dennis, that's my stepdad. He doesn't let anyone go down there anymore. Then my mom started screaming about drugs and prescription. Something. Now they're fighting. The dispatcher's voice remained calm. How old are you, Nathan? 8. Almost 9. You're being very brave, Nathan. I can hear how scared you are, but you're doing exactly the right thing. From downstairs came the sound of something shattering, followed by his mother's voice, raw with betrayal. 3 years of nursing school. Everything I've worked for. You've destroyed it all. The police will be there very soon, the dispatcher assured him. Can you hear sirens yet? Nathan strained to listen, and yes, there it was, the distant wail of approaching sirens. I think so. That's right. They're coming to help. I want you to stay in your room until the officers arrive. Okay? They'll let you know when it's safe to come out. The sirens grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Car doors slammed outside. Nathan crept to his window and saw 3 police cruisers parked at odd angles in front of their house. Emergency lights painting the neighborhood in alternating flashes of blue and red. Officers emerged quickly, approaching the house with purpose. The heavy pounding on the front door echoed through the house. Boston Police. Open up. The police are here, Nathan told the dispatcher, a strange relief washing over him. Good job, Nathan. The officers will take it from here. You can hang up now if you want to, or I can stay on the line until they come to find you. I'll hang up, Nathan decided, suddenly desperate to know what was happening downstairs. Okay, you've done the right thing, Nathan. The officers will make sure you and your mom are safe. Nathan ended the call and placed his mother's phone carefully on his desk. He opened his bedroom door just as a new voice, authoritative and official, filled the foyer below. Ma'am, we received a 911 call from this address. Is everyone okay? Nathan crept to the top of the stairs. From his vantage point, he could see the front door standing open, 2 uniformed officers. A tall black man and a shorter woman with auburn hair pulled into a tight bun, standing in the entryway. His mother stood before them, her bathrobe clutched tightly around her, her wet hair plastered to her pale face. My son, she said, her voice trembling. He must have called. She spotted Nathan on the stairs and her expression crumpled. Nathan, baby, are you okay? The male officer followed her gaze, finding Nathan half hidden in the shadows. Hey there, buddy. Did you call 911 tonight? Nathan nodded, suddenly afraid he'd done something wrong. His mother's face was a complex mixture of emotions he couldn't fully decipher. He heard me scream, Julia explained, her voice steadying slightly as she shifted into what Nathan recognized as her professional mode. The calm voice she used when explaining difficult things. But it's not no one is hurt. It's just, she faltered, looking lost. Where's your husband, ma'am? The female officer asked. In the basement, Julia said, pointing toward the open door. But please, my son shouldn't see this. Williams, stay with the mother and child. The male officer directed his partner. I'll check the basement. Mom! Nathan called down, his voice small. Are you hurt? Julia looked up at him, and in the harsh light from the open front door, he could see tears streaking her face. No, sweetie, I'm not hurt. Everything's going to be okay. But even at 8, Nathan knew this wasn't true. Nothing about this night felt like it would ever be okay again. The female officer, Williams, approached the stairs. Hi there. I'm Officer Williams. What's your name? Nathan. Well, Nathan, why don't you come down here and sit with your mom while my partner checks things out? Nathan descended the stairs slowly, never taking his eyes off his mother. When he reached her, she pulled him into a fierce hug, her body trembling against his. I'm so sorry, she whispered into his hair. I'm so sorry. From the basement came the sound of raised voices, the male officer and Dennis in some kind of confrontation. Officer Williams positioned herself between the basement door and where Nathan stood with his mother, her hand resting lightly on the holster at her hip. Rebecca, she said gently, addressing Julia. Why don't you and Nathan wait in the living room? Julia nodded numbly, guiding Nathan toward the couch. The television was still on, playing a late-night talk show, the host's jokes creating a surreal backdrop to their nightmare. Julia muted it with shaking hands, then sank onto the couch, pulling Nathan close to her side. Did Dennis hurt you? Nathan whispered. No, honey. Julia stroked his hair. Dennis has been doing some very bad things. Things I didn't know about. Before she could explain further, heavy footsteps on the basement stairs announced the return of the male officer, followed by Dennis. Nathan's eyes widened at the sight of his stepfather in handcuffs. His face flushed with anger. Julia, don't say another word, Dennis called out, his voice tight with fury. Not one more word until we get a lawyer. Sir, be quiet, the officer ordered firmly, guiding Dennis toward the front door. As they passed the living room entrance, Dennis's eyes landed on Nathan, narrowing with rage. You little snitch, he spat. This is all your fault. That's enough. The officer jerked Dennis forward, away from Nathan's sight. Julia's arm tightened protectively around Nathan's shoulders. Don't listen to him, baby. You did nothing wrong. Officer Williams appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Matthews, we're going to need you to come down to the station to answer some questions. Am I under arrest? Julia's voice was barely audible. No, ma'am. Not at this time. But we need to understand what's happening here. Do you have someone who can come stay with your son? Julia nodded slowly. My mother. She lives in Cambridge. Call her, please, and pack a few things for yourself and Nathan. This is going to be a long night. As Officer Williams stepped away to speak into her radio, Julia turned to face Nathan fully, her hands gently framing his face. Her eyes, usually warm brown, looked almost black with fear and something else. Determination. Listen to me, Nathan. What Dennis said isn't true. You did exactly the right thing by calling 911. No matter what happens next, I need you to remember that. You were brave and you were right. Nathan nodded, though confusion still swirled through him. What did Dennis do? What was in the basement? Julia hesitated, clearly struggling to find age-appropriate words for something incomprehensible. Dennis was taking things that didn't belong to him, from my hospital, and hiding them in our basement. More police officers had arrived, moving purposefully between the basement and their vehicles outside. Nathan watched as they carried evidence bags, some containing what looked like small boxes and bottles, others filled with papers. Are you in trouble too? He asked, the question that had been forming a cold knot in his stomach. Julia's eyes filled with fresh tears. I don't know, sweetie. I hope not. But no matter what happens, we're going to get through this together. You and me. Just like always. Nathan nodded, trying to be brave for his mother even as his world crumbled around them. Outside, more sirens approached, the night growing louder as their life grew suddenly, irrevocably uncertain. As Julia left to pack their overnight bags, Nathan remained on the living room couch, watching the parade of officers through their home. He felt oddly disconnected, as if watching a movie about someone else's life. The tall male officer who had taken Dennis away returned, removing latex gloves as he entered the living room. Hey there, he said, crouching down to Nathan's eye level. I'm Detective Morgan. You did a really brave thing tonight, calling 911. Nathan looked at him uncertainly. My stepdad said it was my fault. Detective Morgan shook his head firmly. Your stepdad is wrong. What he was doing in that basement, that's his fault and his choice. You protected your mom by making that call. But I don't understand what he was doing. The detective considered this, his kind face serious. Your stepdad was taking medicine that was supposed to go to sick people at the hospital where your mom works. He was going to sell it to people who shouldn't have it. That's against the law. And he used my mom's things to do it? It looks that way, but we're going to figure all this out. He stood as Julia returned with 2 small duffels. Mrs. Matthews, do you have somewhere you and Nathan can stay tonight? My mother's coming. And please, my name is Lewis. Julia Lewis. I never legally changed it after the marriage. Detective Morgan nodded. Ms. Lewis, then. We'll need you to come to the station, but not tonight. Get some rest, and come in tomorrow morning. We'll have more questions then. Am I a suspect? Julia asked bluntly, her arm instinctively pulling Nathan closer. The detective's expression softened slightly. At this point, we're gathering information. The evidence suggests this operation has been going on for some time. We need to understand your level of awareness or involvement. I had no idea, Julia said firmly. None. That's what we'll need to establish. A car pulled up outside, its headlights sweeping across the living room windows. Julia glanced out. That's my mother. Nathan had never been so happy to see his grandmother's ancient blue Volvo. As they stepped outside into the cold November air, he looked back at their house. The only home he had known since he was 5. It looked different now, transformed by the police cars and crime scene tape that an officer was stringing across their front porch. Don't look back, sweetie, Julia said softly, guiding him toward his grandmother's waiting car. We're going to be okay. But as they drove away, Nathan couldn't stop himself from turning for one last glance at the house on Willow Street, where his childhood had ended with a single phone call, where nothing would ever be the same again. The kitchen in Grandmother Elaine's Cambridge apartment was nothing like home. It was smaller, with honey-colored cabinets and a collection of ceramic roosters peering down from every available surface. But at 7:30 the next morning, as Nathan sat at the round oak table with a bowl of cereal before him, the unfamiliar surroundings felt oddly comforting. Here, at least, there were no basement doors with brass locks, no evidence bags being carried out by grim-faced officers. His grandmother bustled around, making coffee and occasionally patting his shoulder as she passed. She had been waiting for them when they arrived late the previous night, her face lined with worry, wearing a flannel nightgown under her coat. She had welcomed them with fierce hugs and no questions, settling Nathan in the small guest room while Julia took the pull-out sofa in the living room. Eat your breakfast, sweetheart, Grandmother Elaine urged now, placing a glass of orange juice beside his barely touched cereal. You need your strength today. Nathan dutifully lifted a spoonful to his mouth, but the flakes tasted like cardboard. His stomach felt twisted with anxiety about what would happen next. His mother had been awake before him, already dressed in a navy blue sweater and black pants that Grandmother Elaine had fetched from her closet of emergency supplies. Never know when someone might need a change of clothes, she'd explained with forced cheerfulness. Julia had left 20 minutes ago for the police station, her face pale but composed. I'll be back soon, she'd promised, kissing Nathan's forehead. Be good for Grandma. Now, Grandmother Elaine sat across from him, cradling her coffee mug in both hands. Her silver hair was arranged in its usual neat bun, but Nathan could see the worry in the tightness around her eyes. You know, she said, her voice gentle, your mother told me how brave you were last night, calling 911 when you were scared. Nathan pushed his cereal around the bowl. Dennis said it was my fault. Grandmother Elaine's expression hardened momentarily before softening again. Dennis Matthews wouldn't know the truth if it jumped up and bit him on the nose. Listen to me, Nathan. You did exactly the right thing. You protected your mother. But what's going to happen to her? The police think she did bad things too. His grandmother sighed, setting down her coffee. The police have questions, that's all. Once they understand that your mother had nothing to do with Dennis's activities, everything will be fine. Nathan wasn't convinced. He'd seen the way the officers looked at his mother, heard the careful way Detective Morgan had phrased his words. What if they don't believe her? They will, Grandmother Elaine said firmly. Because it's the truth. And because your mother has never done anything wrong in her life, except maybe marry that man in the first place. She caught herself, offering a quick smile. I'm sorry, that wasn't fair. Grown-ups sometimes make mistakes in who they trust. Nathan thought about this, remembering the look of absolute shock on his mother's face when she'd emerged from the basement. Whatever she had found down there had been a complete surprise to her. Grandma? What was Dennis doing in our basement? Detective Morgan said something about medicine, but I don't understand. Grandmother Elaine hesitated, clearly weighing how much to explain. Dennis was taking medicines from the hospital where your mother works. Medicines that were supposed to help sick people. He was selling them to people who didn't have prescriptions for them. Like drug dealing? Nathan had learned about that in his school's D.R.E. program. Something like that, yes, she admitted. And he used your mother's work information to do it, her computer passwords, her signature. He was pretending to be acting with her permission. But she didn't know. Of course she didn't know, Grandmother Elaine said firmly. Your mother saves lives. She would never do anything to hurt her patients. Nathan nodded, feeling slightly better. His mother was good. Everyone knew that. Surely the police would see it too. Now, his grandmother continued, rising from the table, I thought we might walk to the bookstore later. You've read through all the books you packed, and we might be staying here a few days. Can we go to the Museum of Science instead? The suggestion was automatic. The museum had always been his favorite place. Then he remembered their circumstances and slumped. Never mind. Mom probably can't afford it now. Grandmother Elaine's face softened. Don't you worry about money, Nathan. I've got plenty saved up for museum trips with my favorite grandson. I'm your only grandson, which makes you my favorite by default, she replied with a wink. Finish your breakfast, and we'll see about that museum. The Boston Police Department's headquarters was a modern building of brick and glass, imposing in its institutional solidity. Julia sat in an interview room, a styrofoam cup of mediocre coffee cooling before her. Across the table, Detective Morgan and a female detective named Chun had been questioning her for over an hour. So you maintain that you had no knowledge of the operation your husband was running from your basement? Detective Chun asked, her tone professional but skeptical. None whatsoever, Julia replied firmly. The basement has been off limits for months. Dennis claimed he needed the space for his medical supply business records. The legitimate business? Yes. He sells hospital equipment, beds, monitors, that sort of thing. Or at least that's what I thought he did. Julia ran a hand through her hair, still damp from her rushed morning shower. I work 12-hour shifts, often overnight. I'm rarely home when he's doing business. And yet, Detective Morgan interjected, sliding a folder across the table. We found these in the basement. Julia opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were photocopies of prescription pads with her signature, requisition forms from Boston Memorial Hospital's pharmacy, and what appeared to be login credentials for the hospital's medication tracking system. I didn't write these prescriptions, she said immediately, studying the signatures. This isn't my handwriting. I mean, it's close, but the J is all wrong, and I never loop my L like that. Detective Chun made a note. We'll have a handwriting expert compare these with samples of your authentic signature. Please do, Julia urged, and check the hospital records. I was working during many of these dates. I couldn't possibly have been writing prescriptions for these patients. She scanned the names, none of which she recognized. The medications being diverted, Detective Morgan said, pulling out another document, included OxyContin, Vicodin, Adderall, and various benzodiazepines. Street value of the inventory we found is approximately $75,000. Julia felt sick. All from my hospital? Some from Boston Memorial, others from various sources. Your husband appears to have built quite the distribution network. Morgan's gaze was steady but not unkind. MS, Lewis, the evidence suggests this operation has been running for at least 8 months. Are you asking us to believe you noticed nothing unusual during that time? Julia took a deep breath. Detective, I'm a single mother who works 50 to 60 hours a week in pediatric intensive care. When I'm home, I'm either sleeping or spending time with my son. Dennis handled our finances, maintained the house, and took care of Nathan when I couldn't be there. Her voice cracked slightly. I trusted him. Completely. A great deal of cash was found in the basement as well, Detective Chin noted. Did you never question where this money was coming from? Dennis told me his business was doing well. He sold medical equipment to private practices and smaller clinics. It seemed plausible that he was successful. Julia leaned forward, her voice intensifying. If I had known, do you think I would have allowed this in my home? With my 8-year-old son sleeping upstairs? Using my professional credentials, which I worked years to earn. The detectives exchanged glances. There's something else you should know, Julia continued. Dennis recently convinced me to add his name to my bank accounts. He said it was for convenience, in case something happened to me. A new realization struck her. Oh God, the mortgage payments, Nathan's college fund. We've frozen all accounts associated with Dennis Matthews, Detective Morgan assured her. But we'll need to review your financial records as part of the investigation. Julia nodded numbly. Of course, whatever you need. One more thing, Detective Chin added. Your husband is claiming you were a willing participant, that you provided him with the hospital access in exchange for a percentage of the profits. Anger flashed through Julia, hot and clarifying. He's lying. I've devoted my life to helping people, not exploiting them. Check my record at the hospital. Talk to my colleagues. I've never had so much as a disciplinary warning in 9 years of nursing. We will, Morgan assured her. For now, we're done with questions, but please don't leave town. We may need to speak with you again. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, Detective Chun replied. But the investigation is ongoing. What about Dennis? Mr. Matthews is being charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, identity theft, and distribution of controlled substances. His arraignment is scheduled for Monday morning. Julia stood, gathering her purse. My son, he doesn't understand what's happening. Is there someone who could talk to him? A child specialist or something? We can arrange for him to speak with someone from victim services, Morgan offered. Children his age often struggle to process these situations. Thank you, Julia said sincerely. At the door, she paused. When can we go home? The crime scene team should be finished by tomorrow, Chin answered. But you might want to consider staying elsewhere for now. The press has gotten wind of the story. Julia's stomach dropped. The press. Morgan's expression was sympathetic. A hospital employee diverting prescription medications is newsworthy, unfortunately. And your husband's operation was significant. The department will be holding a press conference this afternoon. Will my name be mentioned? Not by us, Morgan assured her. But I can't promise reporters won't dig. Julia closed her eyes briefly, imagining the headlines, the whispers, the scrutiny that would fall on her and Nathan. Thank you for the warning. As she left the police station, Julia squinted in the harsh November sunlight. The world looked exactly the same as it had yesterday, and yet everything had changed. Her career, her home, her financial security, her reputation, all were now in jeopardy. And most devastating of all, her son's sense of safety had been shattered by the man she had brought into their lives. Julia pulled out her phone, noticing 3 missed calls from the hospital's administration office. That would have to wait. Right now, she needed to get back to Nathan. The Museum of Science buzzed with weekend visitors, families moving between exhibits with varying levels of enthusiasm. Nathan stood transfixed before a display on black holes, barely aware of his grandmother a few feet away, pretending to read the informational plaque while actually watching him with concerned eyes. The museum had always been Nathan's sanctuary. Here, among the exhibits explaining everything from dinosaurs to electricity, he found comfort in the ordered presentation of facts, the clear cause and effect of scientific principles. If you understood the rules that govern the universe, things made sense. But today, not even the familiar wonders of the museum could fully distract him from the chaos at home. As he watched the simulation of a star being consumed by a black hole, he couldn't help thinking about how his own life had been sucked into something dark and incomprehensible overnight. Nathan. He turned to find his mother standing beside him, her attempt at a smile not quite reaching her eyes. She wore the clothes grandmother Elaine had lent her, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, but something about her seemed different. A new tension in her shoulders, a wariness in her gaze. Mom! Relief flooded through him. Part of him had been afraid she wouldn't come back, that the police would keep her the way they had kept Dennis. Julia knelt to hug him, holding on a beat longer than usual. Have you been enjoying the museum? Yeah. We saw the lightning show, and Grandma let me touch the plasma globe twice. Twice? She must really like you. Are you okay? Nathan asked, studying her face. What did the police say? Julia glanced at her mother, who had approached when she spotted her daughter. They asked a lot of questions. But everything's going to be fine. Nathan knew this wasn't the full truth. He might be only 8, but he wasn't a baby. Are they going to arrest you too? Julia's eyes widened slightly before her expression softened. No, honey, I didn't do anything wrong. The police understand that. But it will take time to sort everything out, Grandmother Elaine added, placing a hand on Nathan's shoulder. Which means you get to have an extended sleepover at my place. Lucky me. Nathan wasn't fooled by their forced cheerfulness, but he played along. Can we get pizza for dinner? I think that can be arranged, his grandmother replied. Why don't you show your mother the space exploration exhibit while I rest these old legs for a bit? As they walked through the museum, Julia kept a protective hand on Nathan's shoulder. They paused before a model of the Mars rover, its mechanical arm extended toward a simulated rock sample. Mom, Nathan said quietly, will we ever go back to our house? Julia hesitated. Yes, but not today. Maybe tomorrow or the next day. The police are still looking at things in the basement. All the medicine that Dennis stole? Julia's step faltered. Who told you that? Grandma. And Detective Morgan said something about it last night. Nathan looked up at her. Why did Dennis do it? Julia guided him to a bench away from the main flow of visitors. I don't know for sure, she admitted. But I think Dennis wanted money, and he found a way to get it that was wrong and illegal. Did he steal your hospital passwords? Julia looked surprised by his perception. Yes. He must have been watching when I logged in sometimes, or found where I wrote them down. And he copied your signature? It seems that way. Nathan absorbed this. So he tricked you? Yes. Julia's voice was barely audible. He tricked me completely. Nathan thought about the notebook in his backpack, with its careful record of Dennis's nighttime activities. He hadn't shown it to anyone yet. Would it help his mother if the police saw it? Would it prove she hadn't known what Dennis was doing? Mom, I have something to show you, he began, but was interrupted by his grandmother's return. There's a demonstration of the Van de Graaff generator starting in 5 minutes, she announced. Nathan, you wouldn't want to miss that, would you? Remember how your hair stood up last time? The moment slipped away as Nathan was caught between his desire to help his mother and the 8-year-old's natural attraction to scientific demonstrations that promised visual spectacle. Can we see it? Of course, Julia said, rising from the bench. Lead the way. The local news was worse than Julia had imagined. Back at her mother's apartment that evening, after Nathan had gone to bed, she sat with Elaine watching the coverage of Dennis's arrest on the small television in the living room. A major prescription drug ring operating out of a quiet Boston neighborhood was dismantled last night, the newscaster announced with practiced gravity. Dennis Matthews, 36, is accused of stealing prescription medications from Boston Memorial Hospital and selling them on the street. Sources say Matthews used his wife's position as a nurse to access the hospital's pharmacy. They're making it sound like I was involved, Julia whispered, horrified. Turn it off, Mom. But Elaine seemed transfixed by the report. Wait, look. The screen showed footage of their house on Willow Street, yellow police tape cordoning off the front yard. A reporter stood on the sidewalk, microphone in hand. Neighbors say they were shocked to learn about the criminal enterprise being run from the basement of the Matthews home. The operation was discovered when 8-year-old Nathan Lewis, Matthews' stepson, called 911 after hearing a disturbance. "Oh God," Julia groaned. "They used his name. They used my son's name on the news." Hospital officials have declined to comment on how Matthews was able to divert such large quantities of controlled substances. The reporter continued. Boston Memorial Hospital released a statement saying they are conducting an internal investigation and cooperating fully with police. The report cut back to the studio. Dennis Matthews is being held without bail pending his arraignment. His wife, Julia Lewis, a pediatric nurse at Boston Memorial, has not been charged at this time. Reporting live, this is Diane Willis for Channel 7 News. Julia buried her face in her hands. "This is a nightmare. Everyone I work with will have seen this. How am I supposed to go back there?" Elaine muted the television. "You hold your head high, that's how. You've done nothing wrong. Haven't I? I brought that man into our home. I married him. I trusted him with my son." Julia's voice broke. "What kind of nurse am I, that I couldn't see what was happening under my own roof?" "Stop that," Elaine said firmly. "Dennis fooled everyone, not just you. He was charming and attentive and seemed devoted to you and Nathan. I keep thinking back, looking for signs I missed. The late-night phone calls he'd take outside. The new clothes, the expensive dinners he'd surprise me with." Julia shook her head. "How could I have been so blind?" "Because you're a good person who expects others to be good as well." Elaine took her daughter's hand. "The police will sort this out. The truth will come out. But in the meantime, my reputation is ruined. I'll probably lose my job. And Nathan," Julia glanced toward the guest room where her son slept. "His classmates will have seen this. Their parents. His teachers. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for," Elaine said. "And Nathan is stronger than most. Look how he handled last night." A soft sound from the hallway drew their attention. Nathan stood in the doorway, his dinosaur pajamas rumpled, his eyes wide. "Nathan," Julia said, quickly wiping her eyes. "What are you doing up?" "I heard talking," he said, moving to sit beside her on the sofa. "Was that our house on TV?" "Yes, honey. The news is talking about what happened with Dennis." "Did they say I called 911? Julia hesitated. "Yes, they did mention that." Nathan considered this. "So everyone will know?" "I'm afraid so. Your classmates might hear about it." She stroked his hair. "Are you worried about that?" To her surprise, Nathan shook his head. "No, I did the right thing." The simple certainty in his voice brought fresh tears to Julia's eyes. "Yes, you did." "Mom!" Nathan fiddled with the hem of his pajama top. "I have something I need to show you and Grandma." He disappeared down the hall, returning moments later with his backpack. From inside, he pulled out a blue composition notebook and handed it to Julia. "What's this, sweetheart? Open it." Julia flipped open the cover and found page after page of careful, childish handwriting. Each entry was dated, with notes about Dennis's comings and goings, particularly his trips to the basement. There were records of visitors who came late at night, descriptions of duffel bags being carried in and out, even a section where Nathan had tried to draw the basement door lock from memory. "Nathan," Julia breathed, stunned. "How long have you been keeping this?" "Since September," he replied. "When Dennis started locking the basement door. It felt weird." Elaine peered over Julia's shoulder at the notebook. "My God, Julia, it's like a detective's casebook." "I was going to show Detective Morgan," Nathan explained. "I think it might help prove you didn't know what Dennis was doing, because I wrote down the times, and you were at work for a lot of them." Julia pulled her son into a fierce hug, the notebook pressed between them. "Nathan Lewis, you are extraordinary. Do you think it will help?" "I'm certain of it," Julia said, drawing back to look him in the eye. "First thing tomorrow, we'll call Detective Morgan." For the first time since the nightmare began, Julia felt a flicker of hope. Her son's careful observations might be exactly what she needed to clear her name. And more importantly, his actions showed a courage and moral clarity that filled her with pride despite everything they were facing. "Now, back to bed with you," Elaine said, taking charge of the situation in her grandmother way. "It's far too late for junior detectives to be awake." Nathan hesitated. "Can I sleep with you tonight, Mom?" On the pull-out couch. Julia smiled, a genuine smile this time. "I'd like that very much." As she tucked Nathan in beside her on the uncomfortable sofa bed 20 minutes later, Julia watched him drift towards sleep, his features relaxing into innocence. Whatever happened next, with the police investigation, with her job, with the life they would have to rebuild, she would make sure Nathan understood one essential truth. His brave act had saved them both from a deception that could have destroyed far more than just their home. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows of her mother's apartment. Julia pulled the blanket higher over Nathan's shoulders, her mind racing with all they would face in the coming days. But for this moment, watching her son sleep, she allowed herself to believe his simple faith that the truth would be enough to see them through. Monday morning dawned gray and cold, with a bitter wind that sent dead leaves skittering across Cambridge sidewalks. Julia sat in Detective Morgan's office at the police station, Nathan's blue composition notebook open on the desk between them. The detective had been silently reading through the entries for nearly 10 minutes, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Your son is quite the observer," he said finally, glancing up at Julia with newfound respect. "Some of these dates and times correspond exactly with our timeline of suspected deliveries." Julia nodded, a mixture of pride and sadness tightening her chest. "Nathan has always noticed details others miss. His teachers call him exceptionally perceptive." "I'd say that's an understatement." Detective Morgan carefully turned another page, where Nathan had drawn a crude map of their basement with X's marking what he called Dennis's secret hiding spots. "This is remarkable for a child his age." "I had no idea he was keeping this record," Julia said softly. "If I'd seen it, maybe I would have asked more questions." Morgan closed the notebook. "Ms. Lewis, this corroborates your statement that you were at work during many of the transactions. Nathan specifically notes when you were on shift and when Dennis had visitors. Will it help my case?" "Substantially. Combined with your hospital time cards and the handwriting analysis, we're building a clearer picture." He leaned back in his chair. "The preliminary report from the expert suggests the signatures on those prescription pads were forgeries, though sophisticated ones." Relief washed through Julia, though she knew this was just the beginning. What happens next? Dennis Matthews will be arraigned this morning. Given the severity of the charges and the evidence we've collected, he'll likely remain in custody. Morgan's expression became more serious. "But I should warn you, the hospital's internal investigation is ongoing. Our department has been in contact with their security team." Julia's stomach tightened. "I received a voicemail from Human Resources yesterday. They've suspended me pending the investigation." "Standard procedure in cases like this," Morgan assured her, though his eyes reflected genuine sympathy. "But with evidence like this," he tapped Nathan's notebook, "I'm hopeful your name will be cleared. In the meantime, I have no income, a mortgage payment due next week, and a son who needs stability." Julia tried to keep the desperation from her voice, but it leaked through anyway. "Have you spoken with a lawyer?" "Not yet. I'm not sure I can afford one. I'd recommend it if possible." Morgan slid a business card across the desk. "Lauren Diaz specializes in cases involving medical professionals. She's good, and she sometimes works on contingency." Julia pocketed the card. "Thank you. There's something else." Morgan hesitated. "We've been interviewing Dennis's associates, people identified through his phone records and the surveillance footage from your neighborhood. One name keeps coming up, Ryan Blackwell." Julia frowned. "I don't know anyone by that name. He's a pharmacy technician at Boston Memorial. According to our sources, he and Dennis had an arrangement. Blackwell would divert medications before they reached the electronic tracking system, and Dennis would handle distribution." "A pharmacy tech?" Julia's mind raced through faces at the hospital. Wait, tall guy usually wears Red Sox caps? I think I've seen him in the cafeteria with Dennis a few times. Dennis introduced him as an old friend from college. Morgan made a note. That fits his description. Did you ever notice anything suspicious about their interactions? Julia thought back, desperately trying to recall any warning signs she might have missed. They would sometimes stop talking when I approached. I assumed they were planning something innocuous. A fantasy football league or a surprise for my birthday. She gave a bitter laugh. I never imagined they were coordinating a drug ring. Blackwell is being brought in for questioning today. If he cooperates, it could further demonstrate your lack of involvement. Julia nodded, though the knowledge that Dennis's operation had tentacles reaching into her workplace only deepened her sense of violation. The hospital had been her sanctuary, the place where she excelled, where she made a difference. Now it too was tainted by his betrayal. Can I ask where Nathan is today? Morgan inquired, changing the subject. With my mother. She's retired, so she can stay with him while I deal with. Julia gestured vaguely. All of this. He's a special kid. Smart, brave. He should be proud of what he did. He is, Julia said, remembering Nathan's certainty about his actions. More than I am of myself right now. Morgan's expression softened. Don't be too hard on yourself, Ms. Lewis. Criminals like Dennis Matthews are expert manipulators. They're charming, attentive, and they exploit the trust of good people. I've seen it hundreds of times. Julia appreciated his kindness, though it did little to ease her self-recrimination. Rising from her chair, she asked, when can I get Nathan's notebook back? It's important to him. We'll need to keep it as potential evidence for now, but I'll make sure it's returned as soon as possible. Morgan stood as well. I'll walk you out. And Ms. Lewis, try to keep your spirits up. The truth has a way of coming to light. If only that were enough, Julia thought as she left the station. The truth might eventually clear her name, but it wouldn't repair the damage to her reputation, restore her career, or erase the trauma Nathan had experienced. Those wounds would take much longer to heal. The Boston Memorial Hospital administrative building stood separate from the main medical complex, a sleek glass structure that had always struck Julia as oddly cold compared to the warm, purposeful environment of the patient care areas. Today, as she waited in a sterile conference room on the third floor, that coldness seemed to permeate the very air. Across the table sat Harold Winters, the hospital's chief of security, Marion Chun from Human Resources, and Douglas Powell, the hospital's legal counsel. Their expressions were professionally neutral, but Julia could feel the undercurrent of suspicion. Thank you for coming in, Ms. Lewis, Powell began, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of a man accustomed to difficult conversations. We appreciate your cooperation during this troubling time. Julia nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. I want to do whatever I can to help the investigation. Good, good. Powell glanced at a file before him. As you know, we've had to suspend you with pay while we conduct our internal review. This is standard protocol in situations involving potential breaches of hospital security. I understand, Julia said, though the word potential stung. There was nothing potential about what had happened. Dennis had absolutely violated hospital protocols using her credentials. Our initial audit shows concerning patterns. Winters took over, sliding several documents across the table. These are login records for the medication tracking system. Your credentials were used numerous times outside your scheduled shifts, often late at night or early morning. Julia examined the records, her heart sinking. I never logged in during these times. This must have been Dennis using my information. Your password was meant to be confidential, Chun pointed out, her tone carefully neutral. How would Mr. Matthews have obtained it? I kept it written in my planner. At home. Julia could hear how damning this sounded. I know it was careless, but with multiple hospital systems requiring different passwords that change every 60 days, she trailed off, recognizing the futility of excuses. There's also the matter of physical access, Winters continued. Your badge was used to enter the pharmacy storage area 17 times in the past 6 months during hours when you weren't scheduled to work. Dennis must have taken my badge from my purse. I always kept it in the side pocket. Powell cleared his throat. Ms. Lewis, while we understand the police investigation is ongoing and you haven't been charged with any crime, the hospital has an obligation to protect its patients and its reputation. The evidence suggests, at minimum, negligence with your security credentials. The word landed like a physical blow. Negligence. In nursing, few accusations carried more weight. I trusted my husband, Julia said, her voice tight with emotion. That was my mistake. But I never knowingly compromised patient care or hospital security. The missing medications tell a different story, Winters replied. Oxycodone, Percocet, Vicodin, Adderall, all high-value, highly addictive substances, which I had nothing to do with diverting, Julia insisted. The police are building a case that shows Dennis worked with Ryan Blackwell from pharmacy. Have you questioned him? The three exchanged glances. Mr. Blackwell is also suspended pending investigation, Chun confirmed. But his involvement, if proven, doesn't negate the security breach that occurred through your credentials. What exactly are you suggesting? Julia asked, a creeping dread settling in her stomach. Powell interlaced his fingers on the table. The Massachusetts Board of Nursing has been notified of the situation, as required by law. They'll conduct their own investigation regarding your license. Julia felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. Her nursing license, the credential she'd worked countless hours to earn and maintain, the professional identity that defined her, was in jeopardy. In the meantime, Powell continued, seemingly oblivious to her distress, we'll need you to surrender your hospital badge and any keys. Your electronic access has already been deactivated. Julia reached into her purse with numb fingers, extracting the badge she'd worn proudly for 9 years. The photo showed a younger version of herself, smiling confidently, unaware of how precarious that confidence would prove to be. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us? Chen asked. Anything that might help our investigation? A dozen thoughts raced through Julia's mind, her spotless record before this incident, the hundreds of patients she'd cared for, the extra shifts she'd taken during COVID when the pediatric ICU was short-staffed. But none of it seemed to matter in the face of the documentation before them. No, she said quietly, except that I hope you'll consider my entire history with the hospital, not just this betrayal by my husband. We'll take everything into account, Powell assured her, though his tone suggested the decision was already leaning in one direction. We'll be in touch as the investigation progresses. Julia stood, gathering her composure along with her purse. Thank you for your time. As she walked through the administrative building's lobby, she caught sight of herself in the reflective glass doors. A pale, diminished version of the confident nurse who had once strode these halls. For the first time since the nightmare began, she allowed herself to wonder if her career might truly be over. Nathan sat at a round table in the back of Cambridge Public Library, a stack of books beside him and his grandmother knitting quietly across from him. The library had been Elaine's suggestion, a place where they could spend the afternoon while Julia attended her meetings, somewhere quiet and normal where Nathan could lose himself in stories and facts. But concentration eluded him. He'd started and abandoned 3 different books, unable to focus on even his favorite subjects. His mind kept returning to the events of the weekend, to the police officers in their home, to Dennis's angry face as he was led away in handcuffs. Everything okay with your book, sweetheart? Grandmother Elaine asked, noticing his restlessness. I can't focus, he admitted. I keep thinking about Mom, and about going back to school tomorrow. Elaine set her knitting aside. You're worried about what the other children might say? Nathan nodded. What if they saw the news? What if they think Mom and Dennis are drug dealers? Then you'll tell them the truth, Elaine said simply, that your mother had no idea what Dennis was doing, and that you were very brave to call for help. But what if they don't believe me? Some might not, she acknowledged, her honesty one of the things Nathan had always appreciated about his grandmother. People sometimes believe what's easiest or what sounds most exciting, rather than what's true. But the people who matter, your real friends, they'll listen. Nathan considered this. He didn't have many close friends. He'd always been more comfortable with books than with other children. But there was Jack from Science Club, and Zoe who sat next to him in math. They might understand. I wish we didn't have to go back to our house, he said, changing the subject. I like staying with you. Elaine smiled, though her eyes remained serious. I like having you both too. But running away from problems doesn't solve them. Your mother needs to face what's happened, and so do you in your own way. I'm not running away, Nathan protested. I called 911. I showed the police my notebook. You did, Elaine agreed. And that took real courage. But there's another kind of courage too. The kind that helps you walk into your classroom tomorrow with your head held high, knowing some kids might say unkind things. Nathan slumped in his chair. I don't feel very courageous about that. Few people do, sweetheart. Courage isn't about not feeling afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you are afraid. A movement near the library entrance caught Nathan's attention. Detective Morgan stood in the doorway, scanning the room. When he spotted Nathan and Elaine, he approached their table with purposeful strides. Mrs. Lewis? Nathan? I hope I'm not interrupting. Detective Morgan. Elaine greeted him, setting aside her knitting. Julia mentioned you might stop by today. I wanted to update you both, and I thought it might be easier to do it here rather than at the station. He pulled out a chair, joining them at the table. Nathan, I wanted to thank you again for your notebook. It's been extremely helpful. Nathan felt a small surge of pride despite the circumstances. Did it help prove Mom didn't know about the basement? It certainly supports her story, Morgan confirmed, along with other evidence we've gathered. He turned to Elaine. Dennis Matthews was arraigned this morning. He's being held on $500,000 bail, which he hasn't posted. Good, Elaine said firmly. That man deserves to stay behind bars. Morgan's expression remained professional, but Nathan thought he detected a flicker of agreement in his eyes. We've also arrested Ryan Blackwell, a pharmacy technician who was working with Matthews. He's begun cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Is that good for Mom? Nathan asked. Very good, Morgan assured him. Blackwell has confirmed that your mother had no knowledge of their operation. He stated that Matthews specifically chose to target your household because he needed access to a medical professional's credentials, and your mother's work schedule made it easy to operate without her knowledge. Elaine made a disgusted sound. He married her to use her. That poor girl. Unfortunately, that appears to be the case, Morgan agreed. Matthews has a history of similar schemes, though none this sophisticated or large-scale. He's been arrested twice before for fraud, operating under different names. Different names? Nathan sat up straighter. So Dennis Matthews isn't his real name? His legal name is Dennis Matheson. He changed it slightly before moving to Boston 3 years ago, likely to make it harder to connect him to his previous arrests. Nathan tried to process this new information. The man who had lived in their house, who had married his mother and sometimes helped with his homework, wasn't even using his real name. It made Dennis seem even more like a stranger. Have you told Julia this? Elaine asked, her voice tight with concern for her daughter. I'll be meeting with her after her hospital appointment, Morgan confirmed. But there's something else you should know. He hesitated, glancing at Nathan before continuing. The press coverage has intensified. A reporter managed to obtain copies of some of the forged prescriptions, and they're running a story questioning hospital security protocols. And dragging my daughter's name through the mud in the process, Elaine concluded bitterly. The department has issued a statement clarifying that Julia Lewis is cooperating fully and is not considered a suspect in our investigation. But mud sticks, Elaine finished for him. Unfortunately, yes. Morgan turned to Nathan. That might make things a bit tough at school for a while. Kids can be mean, Nathan supplied. I know. Morgan's expression softened. They can. But you know what? In my experience, the truth eventually wins out. It might take time, but people figure out who the good guys really are. I hope so, Nathan said, not entirely convinced. I should get going, Morgan said, rising from his chair. I just wanted to let you know about these developments in person. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card, handing it to Nathan. This has my direct number. If you remember anything else about Dennis's activities, or if you have any questions, you can call me anytime. Nathan accepted the card with solemn gravity, treating it like the badge of trust it represented. Thank you. One more thing, Morgan added. Our department has a program called Youth Connect. They work with kids who've been affected by criminal investigations, offering counseling and support groups. Would you be interested in something like that, Nathan? Nathan considered the question seriously. Maybe. I don't know. No pressure. I can give your mom the information, and you can decide together. Morgan nodded to Elaine. Mrs. Lewis, always a pleasure. After the detective departed, Nathan stared at the business card in his hand. Detective James Morgan, Boston Police Department, Special Investigations Unit. A direct line to a real detective who thought his notebook had been helpful, who believed his observations mattered. Grandma, he said after a moment of reflection, do you think I could be a detective when I grow up? Elaine smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all day. I think you'd make an excellent detective, Nathan. You've already proven you have the skills for it. Nathan tucked the card carefully into his pocket, a small beacon of possibility in the uncertainty that had engulfed his life. The house on Willow Street looked smaller somehow as Julia pulled her car into the driveway that evening. The police tape had been removed, but she could still see traces of adhesive on the porch columns. A few neighbors peered from windows as she, Nathan, and Elaine unloaded bags from the trunk, their curious gazes following the family's movements. Head held high, Elaine reminded them quietly. We have nothing to be ashamed of. The interior of the house was exactly as they had left it Friday night, yet it felt fundamentally changed, as if the revelation of what had been happening in the basement had somehow altered the molecular structure of their home. Julia set down her bags and moved through the rooms, taking inventory of what remained familiar. Nathan's astronomy chart on the refrigerator, her nursing textbooks stacked on the coffee table, the family photos lining the hallway. Photos that now included Dennis, his arm around Julia's shoulders, his smile revealed as nothing but calculated deception. I think I'll take these down, she murmured, lifting a frame that showed the three of them at Fenway Park last summer. Good idea, Elaine agreed, examining the kitchen as if searching for further traces of Dennis's presence. We should go through the house, remove anything of his. The police took most of his personal items as evidence, Julia said. But yes, I want everything else gone. Nathan stood in the center of the living room, his backpack still on, as if unsure whether he was staying. Are you okay, sweetie? Julia asked, noticing his hesitation. It feels different, he said simply. I know. Julia knelt to his level. But it's still our home. Just yours and mine now like it was before. Nathan nodded, finally slipping off his backpack. Can I check my room? Of course. I think the police were mostly focused on the basement and Dennis's office. As Nathan disappeared upstairs, Elaine turned to her daughter. How did it go at the hospital? Julia sank onto the couch, the weight of the day crashing down on her. About as well as could be expected. I'm suspended while they investigate, and the nursing board has been notified. Those bureaucratic. Elaine caught herself. They can't possibly think you were involved. They have to consider the possibility, Julia said wearily. Dennis used my credentials, my passwords. There's documented evidence of access under my name. The fact that I didn't know doesn't change the security breach that occurred. But Detective Morgan said this Blackwell person confirmed you weren't involved. That helps with the criminal investigation, but professional negligence is a separate issue. Julia rubbed her temples, where a headache had been building all afternoon. At best, I was careless with my security protocols. At worst, I failed to notice criminal activity in my own home for months. That's absurd, Elaine protested. You work 12-hour shifts. You're exhausted most of the time. How could you possibly have known? Maybe I should have, Julia whispered. Maybe there were signs I missed because I was so desperate to believe I'd found someone who could help me build a stable life for Nathan. Elaine sat beside her daughter, taking her hand. Julia, listen to me. You are a dedicated mother and an excellent nurse. You made one mistake trusting the wrong man. That doesn't erase all the good you've done or the person you are. Julia squeezed her mother's hand, grateful for her unwavering support. I spoke with the lawyer detective Morgan recommended, Lauren Diaz. She thinks we have a strong case to defend my license, but it will take time. And money we don't have. We'll figure it out, Elaine assured her. I have some savings. Not a fortune, but enough to help with the lawyer and the bills until this is sorted out. Mom, I can't take your retirement money. You're not taking anything. I'm offering it. Elaine's tone brooked no argument. Family comes first. Always has, always will. Before Julia could respond, Nathan called from upstairs, his voice tight with distress. Mom, someone's been in my room. Julia and Elaine exchanged worried glances before hurrying up the stairs. They found Nathan standing in his bedroom doorway, staring at the space with wide, shocked eyes. The room had been thoroughly searched. Drawers stood partially open. Books had been removed from shelves and replaced at odd angles, and his toy chest lid was ajar. The police must have searched the entire house, Julia realized aloud. Not just the basement. They took my other notebook, Nathan said, pointing to his desk where a space was conspicuously empty. The one with my star charts and planet observations. I'm sure they'll return it once they realize it's not relevant to their investigation, Julia assured him, though her heart ached at this additional invasion of her son's private space. I don't like that they touched my things, Nathan said, a slight quaver in his voice. It feels wrong. Julia wrapped an arm around his shoulders. I know, honey, but they were just doing their job, trying to find evidence about Dennis's activities. Did they search your room too? I haven't checked yet, but probably. Julia tried to keep her tone light. Maybe we should both clean up our rooms, put everything back where it belongs, make it feel like ours again. Nathan nodded slowly. Okay, but can we check the basement first? I want to see what was down there. Julia hesitated. The basement had been the center of Dennis's operation, the heart of his betrayal. Part of her wanted to seal it off entirely, to pretend it didn't exist. But she recognized the need for closure for both of them. All right, she agreed. But just a quick look. The police have taken everything important anyway. The three descended the basement stairs cautiously, as if expecting to find ghosts of Friday night's revelations still lingering in the musty air. The space looked both foreign and familiar to Julia. The washing machine and dryer stood in one corner, the holiday decorations stacked neatly on metal shelving against the far wall. Normal, everyday items that had coexisted with something sinister. What had once been a general storage area in the center of the basement now stood empty. Shelving units pushed aside, outlines in the dust showing where Dennis's makeshift pharmacy had operated. Evidence tags were still affixed to various surfaces, small numbered markers of a criminal investigation. So this is where he kept everything, Elaine murmured, surveying the space with narrowed eyes. Nathan moved to a corner where a small desk had been pushed against the wall. He used to sit here sometimes. I saw him through the door crack once, counting money. The casual way Nathan referenced his observations struck Julia anew. While she had been working extra shifts to support their family, her 8-year-old son had been quietly watching, documenting, sensing that something was wrong long before she had. I think we've seen enough, Julia decided, suddenly eager to leave the space behind. Let's go back upstairs and order dinner. I don't feel like cooking tonight. As they headed back to the main floor, the doorbell rang. Julia froze, exchanging a wary glance with her mother. Are you expecting anyone? Elaine asked. No. Julia approached the front door cautiously, peering through the peephole. A woman in her 30s stood on the porch, a notebook in one hand and a press badge visible around her neck. It's a reporter. Don't answer it, Elaine advised. They'll go away eventually. But even as she spoke, the reporter raised her hand to knock again, more insistently this time. Ms. Lewis? Julia Lewis? I'm Melissa Turner from the Boston Herald. I'd just like to ask you a few questions about your husband's arrest and the investigation at Boston Memorial Hospital. Julia stepped back from the door, her heart racing. She had expected this. Detective Morgan had warned her about the media interest, but the reality of a reporter on her doorstep still felt like an assault. Mom! Nathan had appeared at her side, his expression worried. What do we do? Julia squared her shoulders, drawing strength from her son's presence. We ignore them. This is our home, and we don't have to speak to anyone we don't want to. The knocking continued for another minute before finally subsiding. Through the peephole, Julia watched the reporter retreat to a car parked across the street, where she appeared to be making notes. She's still watching the house, Julia reported. Vultures, Elaine muttered. Let me call for pizza delivery. We'll eat in the kitchen, away from the windows. As her mother went to place the order, Julia guided Nathan to the living room sofa, sitting close beside him. I'm sorry about all of this, sweetie. The reporters, the police searching your room. None of this is fair to you. Nathan leaned against her side. It's not fair to you either, Mom. You didn't do anything wrong. I made some poor choices, Julia admitted. I should have been more careful. With Dennis, you mean? Yes. And with my work passwords, my hospital badge. I was careless because I trusted him. Nathan considered this. But trust isn't bad, is it? You always tell me to be honest and to trust people unless they give me a reason not to. That's true, Julia acknowledged, struck by her son's insight. Trust is important. Dennis abused that trust, and that's on him, not on us. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the house creaking softly around them as houses do when settling back into familiar patterns. Despite the reporter outside, despite the violated basement below, despite everything that had happened, Julia felt the first tentative stirrings of something like peace. Mom! Nathan broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Anything. Did you love Dennis? For real, I mean. The question caught Julia off guard. She'd been so focused on the practical and legal ramifications of Dennis's betrayal that she'd barely had time to process the emotional impact. I thought I did, she said finally. I cared for him and I believed he cared for us. But looking back, I think I might have been in love with who I thought he was, not who he really was. Because the real Dennis was a criminal, Nathan supplied. Yes, and the real Dennis didn't actually care about us. He was just using us, using me to get what he wanted. Nathan nodded, absorbing this. I didn't love him, he confessed, as if unburdening himself of a guilty secret. I tried to because you wanted me to, but something always felt wrong. Julia's heart constricted. How much had Nathan been shouldering silently, trying to please her? You don't ever have to pretend to feel something you don't, she told him, pulling him closer. Not for me, not for anyone. Not even at school tomorrow? When kids ask about Dennis. Not even then, Julia confirmed. You tell the truth as you understand it. That's all anyone can ask of you. Nathan seemed to take comfort in this permission to be authentic, nestling closer into her side. Outside, the reporter's car eventually pulled away from the curb, at least temporarily giving them respite from unwanted scrutiny. The pizza arrived, and the three gathered in the kitchen, creating a small pocket of normalcy in the midst of chaos. As Julia watched her mother and son engage in their familiar banter over whether pineapple belonged on pizza, Elaine firmly pro, Nathan decidedly against, she allowed herself to hope that they might find their way back to some version of ordinary life, altered by experience but not defined by tragedy. Later, after Nathan had gone to bed and Elaine had settled in the guest room, Julia stood in her bedroom, confronting the space she had shared with Dennis. His clothes still hung in half the closet. His toiletries remained in the bathroom they had shared. Tomorrow, she decided she would pack it all away, donate what could be used, discard the rest. Erase the physical reminders of his presence, even as the emotional and legal repercussions continued to unfold. She changed into pajamas and slipped between sheets that still faintly smelled of his cologne, wondering how long it would take to exorcise all traces of Dennis Matthews or Matheson from their lives. The investigation would continue. The hospital review and nursing board inquiry would proceed. Nathan would face questions and possibly taunts at school. Reporters might return to their doorstep. But tonight they were home. Not the same home it had been before, but theirs nonetheless. And as Julia drifted toward sleep, she held on to the one certainty that had emerged from the wreckage of her marriage. The truth, once revealed, could not be rehidden. Whatever came next, they would face it in the light, not the darkness Dennis had cultivated in their basement. 3 weeks after Dennis's arrest, Julia sat at her kitchen table surrounded by unpaid bills. The mortgage statement, highlighted in yellow, demanded immediate attention. 2 credit card bills, mostly charges Dennis had made, loomed like accusations. The electric bill, Nathan's after-school science program fee. Each piece of paper represented another strand in the web of financial entanglement Dennis had left behind. She sipped cold coffee and made calculations on a yellow legal pad, crossing out numbers and rewriting them with increasing desperation. Her savings were nearly depleted after paying Lauren Diaz's retainer. The hospital's Human Resources Department had confirmed her suspension would remain unpaid until the internal investigation concluded. The Boston Nursing Board had scheduled a hearing for the following month to determine whether her license would be suspended or revoked. 21 days of uncertainty had worn Julia down to a brittle version of herself. She slept fitfully, startling awake from dreams where Dennis stood at the foot of her bed, laughing as he counted prescription bottles. She'd lost weight, her scrubs hanging loosely when she tried them on, a futile ritual of normalcy. Her mother had returned to her own apartment after 2 weeks, though she still came by daily to help with Nathan and bring groceries Julia couldn't afford. "Mom!" Nathan's voice broke through her calculations. He stood in the doorway, already dressed for school in jeans and his favorite blue sweater, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Are you okay?" Julia quickly shuffled the bills into a folder, forcing a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Just doing some paperwork. Ready for school." Nathan nodded, though his eyes lingered on the folder. At 8, he was far too perceptive to be fooled by her forced brightness. "Is it money? Are we going to be poor?" The directness of the question caught Julia off guard. "We're having some temporary financial challenges," she admitted, seeing no point in lying. "But we'll manage. Grandma is helping, and once everything gets sorted out with the hospital, I'll be working again." "When will that be?" "I don't know yet." Julia rose from the table, tucking the folder under a cookbook where it wouldn't be such a visible reminder of their precarious situation. "But Lauren, my lawyer, thinks we're making progress. Ryan Blackwell's testimony has been very helpful." Nathan accepted this with a solemn nod. In the weeks since Dennis's arrest, he had developed an almost adult understanding of the legal proceedings, absorbing information from overheard conversations and his own online research. Julia had found browser histories showing searches for prescription medication fraud and nursing license suspension, evidence of his attempt to comprehend what was happening to their family. "You'd better get your coat," she reminded him. "It's getting colder." As Nathan went to retrieve his jacket, Julia checked her phone. No missed calls from Lauren, no emails from the hospital. The silence was becoming its own form of torture, each day without resolution stretching her nerves thinner. She had expected the system to work more quickly, for the evidence of her innocence to clear her name and restore her life. Instead, bureaucratic wheels turned with excruciating slowness, while her financial reserves dwindled and her professional reputation remained under a cloud of suspicion. "Ready?" Nathan announced, reappearing with his coat. Julia grabbed her car keys, pushing aside her worries to focus on the immediate task of getting her son to school. The drive had become a daily exercise in courage for both of them. Nathan facing the whispers and occasional taunts from classmates who had seen the news coverage of Dennis's arrest. Julia enduring the sideways glances from other parents at drop-off. "Chess club after school today?" she asked as they neared Franklin Elementary. Yeah. Jack and I are practicing for the tournament next month. Julia smiled, genuinely this time. Nathan's friendship with Jack Peterson had been one unexpected bright spot in the aftermath of the crisis. While some children had drawn away from Nathan, Jack, a quiet, thoughtful boy with thick glasses and a passion for science, had drawn closer, fascinated by Nathan's brush with a real police investigation rather than put off by it. I'm glad you and Jack are getting along so well. He doesn't think I'm weird for keeping that notebook about Dennis, Nathan said. He says it was smart. It was smart, Julia agreed. Detective Morgan said it's been crucial evidence. They pulled into the school drop-off lane, joining the procession of minivans and SUVs. Julia noticed Mrs. Whitman, the PTA president, watching from near the entrance. When their eyes met, Mrs. Whitman quickly looked away, busying herself with her phone. Another small rejection in a series of many. Have a good day, sweetheart, Julia said as Nathan gathered his backpack. Grandma will pick you up after chess club. Okay. Nathan hesitated, his hand on the door handle. Mom? Zoe invited me to her birthday party next weekend. Her mom called Grandma yesterday. That's wonderful, Julia said, surprised and touched that at least one family was still willing to include Nathan in normal childhood activities. We'll need to get her a gift. I was thinking maybe a book about stars. She said she liked my astronomy chart. Perfect idea. Julia leaned over to kiss his forehead. See you tonight. She watched as Nathan made his way into the school. His narrow shoulders squared with a determination that squeezed her heart. No 8-year-old should have to summon courage simply to attend elementary school. Yet another consequence of Dennis's actions that she couldn't shield him from. As Julia pulled away from the school, her phone rang. Lauren Diaz's name appeared on the screen, and she quickly connected the call through the car's Bluetooth. Julia? It's Lauren. Do you have a minute? Yes, I just dropped Nathan at school. What's happening? The district attorney's office reached out this morning. They're offering Dennis a plea deal. Julia's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What kind of deal? 20 years for the drug distribution charges, with potential for parole after 12, if he provides detailed information about his distribution network. Will he take it? His lawyer thinks he will. The evidence against him is overwhelming, especially with Blackwell's testimony. Going to trial would likely result in an even longer sentence. Julia absorbed this information, trying to determine how it affected her situation. What does this mean for the hospital investigation? Or the nursing board? That's the other news, Lauren said, her tone shifting. The DA's office is prepared to issue a formal statement clearing you of any criminal involvement. They've become convinced you were an unwitting victim in this scenario. Relief washed through Julia, so powerful she had to pull the car to the side of the road. Really? That's incredible news. It's a significant step, Lauren agreed, though her cautious tone suggested there was more to the story. However, the hospital administration is taking a different position. They're arguing that while you may not have been criminally complicit, your failure to safeguard your credentials constitutes professional negligence. The brief moment of elation faded. What are they proposing? They've offered a settlement. You resign voluntarily, they provide a neutral reference for future employment, and they don't pursue action with the nursing board beyond what's already in motion. They want me to quit? Julia couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. After 9 years of exemplary service? They're concerned about liability, Lauren explained. If patients discovered their medications were being diverted through a nurse's compromised credentials, it could expose the hospital to lawsuits. They're looking to contain the damage by making me the scapegoat. Essentially, yes. I advised them this approach was unreasonable given the circumstances, but they're firm in their position. Julia leaned her head against the headrest, closing her eyes briefly. What about the nursing board? Will they still suspend my license? That's where we have more leverage. With the DA's statement and evidence from the police investigation, we have a strong case to argue that you were a victim, not negligent. The board tends to focus on patient harm, and there's no evidence your actions or inactions directly harmed any patients. So I might keep my license but lose my job? Possibly. Or we fight the hospital's position, which means a longer period without income and no guarantee of victory. Lauren's voice softened. I know this isn't what you hoped for, Julia, but a resignation with a neutral reference would at least allow you to seek employment elsewhere. The implication was clear. Take the settlement, cut your losses, start over somewhere new. Practical advice from a practical attorney who understood the realities of institutional power. I need time to think, Julia said finally. Of course. The hospital has given us until Friday to respond to their offer. Call me when you've made a decision. After ending the call, Julia sat in her parked car, staring out at the November landscape. Trees stripped bare, lawns faded to dull brown, the world preparing for winter dormancy. She felt a similar barrenness within herself, a hollowing out of the professional identity she had built over years of dedicated service. The hospital wanted her gone, a neat excision of potential liability. 9 years of night shifts, of holding the hands of frightened parents, of monitoring fragile children through medical crises. All of it reduced to a risk assessment calculation. A wave of anger rose within her, hot and clarifying. Why should she bear the professional consequences of Dennis's actions? Why was her career being sacrificed while the hospital's security protocols, which had clearly failed on multiple levels, went unexamined? But beneath the anger lay a more pragmatic concern. Nathan. Her son needed stability, needed a mother who could provide for him financially and emotionally. Fighting a protracted battle against the hospital would drain their already depleted resources and extend the period of uncertainty that was taking its toll on both of them. With no clear answer in sight, Julia put the car in drive and continued toward her mother's apartment, where she had promised to help sort through old clothes for donation. A small, manageable task in a life that suddenly had too few of them. The Suffolk County Courthouse loomed against the pale December sky, its stone facade imposing and institutional. Nathan stood on the wide steps beside his mother and grandmother, gazing up at the building where, Detective Morgan had explained, important decisions were made about people who broke the law. Are you sure you want to be here, sweetheart? His mother asked, her face drawn with concern. You don't have to attend the hearing. Grandma could take you to the library instead. I want to see, Nathan insisted. He had dressed carefully that morning, wearing his navy blue dress pants and the tie his grandmother had helped him knot. This was important. Detective Morgan had called it a significant development, and Nathan wanted to understand what was happening. Today, Dennis would formally accept his plea deal, admitting to the crimes he had committed. Nathan had asked his mother to explain what would happen, and she had done her best to frame it in terms he could comprehend. Dennis would tell the judge what he had done wrong, the judge would tell Dennis his punishment, and then Dennis would be taken to prison for a very long time. All right then, Julia said, straightening his tie. But if at any point you want to leave, just tell me or Grandma. Okay? Nathan nodded, though he had no intention of leaving. He needed to see Dennis face the consequences of his actions, needed to witness justice being served in a way his 8-year-old mind could process. Inside, the courthouse bustled with activity. Men and women in suits moved purposefully through the halls, carrying folders and speaking in hushed, important tones. Detective Morgan met them near the entrance to courtroom 3, his expression warming at the sight of Nathan. Hello, Lewis family, he greeted them. Thank you for coming today. I think you'll be pleased with the outcome. Will Dennis really go to prison for 20 years? Nathan asked. That's what the plea agreement states, Morgan confirmed. Though, as I explained to your mom, he could potentially be released earlier for good behavior. But not for a long time, Nathan pressed, needing the reassurance. Not for a long time, Morgan agreed. The judge still has to approve the plea deal, but that's expected to be a formality given the evidence we've collected. They followed Morgan into the courtroom, taking seats in a row behind the prosecutor's table. The room was less grand than Nathan had imagined from television. No soaring ceilings or ornate decorations, just a practical, somewhat worn space with wooden benches and fluorescent lighting. A few other people were scattered around the gallery, including a woman Nathan recognized as a reporter who had tried to interview his mother outside their house. Is that Ryan Blackwell? Julia whispered to Morgan, nodding toward a thin man seated near the front with a woman who appeared to be his attorney. Yes, he'll be formally entering his guilty plea next week. As agreed, he's testifying against the larger distribution network Dennis was connected to. Nathan studied Blackwell with interest. This was the man from the hospital who had helped Dennis steal the medications. He looked ordinary, not like the drug dealers Nathan had seen in movies or the D.R.E. presentations at school. Just a regular person who had made very bad choices. A door at the side of the courtroom opened, and Dennis entered, escorted by 2 officers. Nathan felt his breath catch. His former stepfather wore an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled in front of him. His normally neat hair had grown longer, and stubble shadowed his jaw. He looked diminished somehow, smaller than Nathan remembered. Julia's hand found Nathan's, squeezing gently. "You okay?" she whispered. Nathan nodded, unable to look away from Dennis. Even from a distance, he could see the cold calculation in his stepfather's eyes as Dennis scanned the courtroom. When Dennis's gaze landed on their row, his expression hardened. A flash of anger quickly suppressed as his attorney leaned over to whisper something in his ear. The proceedings began with formal announcements Nathan couldn't fully follow, legal terminology that washed over him in a confusing stream. He focused instead on watching Dennis, trying to reconcile this prisoner with the man who had lived in their house, who had sometimes helped with his math homework or taken him to baseball games. Had any of it been real, or had every interaction been part of Dennis's elaborate deception? The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver-rimmed glasses, addressed Dennis directly. "Mr. Matheson, you understand the terms of this plea agreement." Dennis's voice was steady, almost bored. "Yes, Your Honor. And you are entering this plea voluntarily, without coercion?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Please state for the record the crimes to which you are pleading guilty." Dennis cleared his throat. "Conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, identity theft, fraud, forgery, and theft of medical supplies. And you acknowledge that by entering this plea, you waive your right to a trial by jury?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge turned to the prosecutor. "Please summarize the evidence against the defendant." The prosecutor, a woman with dark hair pulled into a severe bun, rose from her table. "Your Honor, the evidence against Dennis Matheson, also known as Dennis Matthews, is substantial. Over a period of approximately 8 months, Matheson operated a sophisticated prescription drug diversion scheme from the basement of his residence on Willow Street in Boston." Nathan listened with growing fascination as the prosecutor detailed Dennis's crimes, how he had stolen his mother's credentials, forged her signature, and worked with Ryan Blackwell to divert medications before they were logged in the hospital's tracking system. The scope of the operation was larger than Nathan had realized, with connections to drug dealers across 3 states. "Particularly disturbing, Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, "is the calculated nature of Matheson's deception. Evidence suggests he specifically targeted Julia Lewis, marrying her to gain access to her hospital credentials and create a legitimate front for his operation." Nathan felt his mother stiffen beside him. This confirmation of Dennis's ultimate betrayal, that their entire family unit had been constructed as a criminal enterprise, seemed to strike her physically. Furthermore, the prosecutor added, "Matheson has 2 prior convictions for similar schemes in Rhode Island and New Hampshire, operating under different aliases. This pattern of behavior demonstrates a persistent disregard for the law and for the well-being of others." The judge reviewed documents before her, occasionally glancing at Dennis over the rim of her glasses. Finally, she set the papers down and fixed him with a stern gaze. "Mr. Matheson, before I accept your plea and impose sentencing, do you have anything you wish to say to the court?" Dennis stood, his attorney rising beside him. "Yes, Your Honor. I want to express my regret for my actions. I understand the harm I've caused to the hospital system and to those who trusted me." Nathan waited for Dennis to look in their direction, to acknowledge the specific harm he had caused to them. But Dennis's gaze remained fixed on the judge, his apology carefully worded to mention no specific victims. "He's not even sorry," Nathan whispered to his mother. I know, sweetie, she replied softly. Some people aren't capable of genuine remorse. The judge seemed equally unimpressed by Dennis's statement. Mr. Matheson, given your prior convictions and the calculated nature of these offenses, I am inclined to accept the prosecution's recommended sentence. You are hereby sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary, with possibility of parole after serving 12 years. She continued with additional details about fines and supervised release, but Nathan had stopped listening. 20 years. By the time Dennis might be released, Nathan would be 20, a grown man possibly in college. The enormity of the time span helped settle something within him. Dennis would not be returning to disrupt their lives again, at least not for a very long time. As Dennis was led from the courtroom, he finally turned toward their row. His eyes met Nathan's briefly, a cold, evaluating look that contained neither apology nor regret. Nathan stared back, refusing to look away until Dennis had been escorted through the side door and out of sight. You did well, Grandmother Elaine murmured, patting his shoulder. Very brave. I wasn't scared, Nathan said, which wasn't entirely true but felt important to assert. I just wanted to see him get his punishment. And now justice has been served, Detective Morgan said, joining them as they prepared to leave. The system worked as it should. Julia's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. For some of us, perhaps. Morgan's face softened with understanding. Any movement from the hospital administration? They're standing firm on their settlement offer. Resign with a neutral reference or face termination after the internal review concludes. Julia's voice carried a mixture of resignation and simmering anger. I have until tomorrow to decide. That's not right, Morgan said, shaking his head. After everything that's come to light about Matheson's deception, they should be supporting you, not pushing you out. Apparently, institutional reputation trumps individual justice. Julia managed a tight smile. But at least the nursing board hearing looks promising. Lauren thinks we have a strong case to keep my license. Good. You're an excellent nurse, Ms. Lewis. The system needs people like you. As they made their way out of the courthouse, Nathan noticed his mother walking taller, as if a weight had been partially lifted. Dennis was going to prison. His crimes had been officially acknowledged. It was a beginning, if not a complete resolution. Outside, a few reporters waited on the courthouse steps, cameras and microphones at the ready. Julia tensed, preparing to hurry past them, but Detective Morgan stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll give a brief statement. Dennis Matheson, also known as Dennis Matthews, has been sentenced to 20 years for his role in a prescription drug diversion scheme. This concludes a major investigation by the Boston Police Department's Special Investigations Unit. A reporter called out, Detective, what about Julia Lewis? Will she face charges? Ms. Lewis has been completely cleared of any criminal wrongdoing, Morgan stated firmly. The evidence conclusively demonstrates she was an unwitting victim of Matheson's elaborate fraud. The district attorney's office will be issuing a formal statement to that effect later today. The reporters turned toward Julia, shouting questions. Morgan smoothly intercepted them. Ms. Lewis has no comment at this time. Please respect her privacy and that of her young son. With that, he guided the Lewis family toward the parking garage, creating a buffer between them and the press. Thank you, Julia said as they reached her car, for everything you've done for us. Just doing my job, Morgan replied, though his smile suggested it had become more than that. Nathan, take care of your mom, okay? She's one of the good ones. I know, Nathan said seriously. As they drove away from the courthouse, a light snow began to fall. The first of the season, transforming the city into something softer, cleaner. Nathan watched the flakes swirl against the window, thinking about justice and consequences, about how some things could be resolved while others remained unsettled. Mom, he said suddenly, you should fight the hospital. Julia glanced at him in the rearview mirror. What do you mean, sweetie? Don't resign. Make them prove you did something wrong. The clarity of his conviction surprised even him. Dennis is going to jail because he did bad things. But you didn't do anything bad. You just trusted the wrong person. From the passenger seat, Grandmother Elaine smiled. The wisdom of children. Julia was quiet for a long moment, considering her son's words. It would be a difficult fight, Nathan. Without income, with legal bills mounting. We could sell stuff, Nathan suggested. I could sell my telescope. And my Lego sets. Oh, sweetheart, no. Julia's voice caught. I would never ask you to give up your things. But it's not fair, Nathan insisted. You always tell me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Isn't this the same thing? The car fell silent except for the swish of windshield wipers brushing away snowflakes. Nathan could almost see his mother thinking, weighing options, recalculating her approach to their shared dilemma. You know what? She said finally, a new determination entering her voice. You're absolutely right. We should practice what we preach. I'm going to call Lauren and tell her we're rejecting the settlement offer. Really? Nathan couldn't keep the excitement from his voice. Really? It might be a longer road, but it's the right one. Julia caught his eye in the mirror again. Thank you for reminding me what's important. And you won't be alone, Elaine added. I've told you before, my savings are there if you need them. Plus, I've been talking with some of the nurses from your unit. They're organizing a support fund. They believe in you, Julia. They are. Julia sounded genuinely surprised. Not everyone is as callous as the hospital administration, Elaine said. Your colleagues recognize injustice when they see it. For the first time in weeks, Nathan saw his mother smile with genuine hope, a transformation that seemed to lighten the air within the car despite the gathering storm outside. So we're going to fight, Nathan confirmed, liking the sound of those words. We're going to fight, Julia agreed. Together. The conference room at Lauren Diaz's law office was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston skyline. Julia sat beside her attorney, facing the hospital's legal team across a polished mahogany table. The contrast between her circumstances and the wealth represented by the room's luxurious furnishings wasn't lost on her. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Lauren began, her professional demeanor masking the strategizing they had done over the past 2 weeks. My client appreciates the opportunity to discuss alternatives to resignation. Our position hasn't changed, replied Douglas Powell, the hospital's chief counsel. Boston Memorial believes a voluntary resignation is the most appropriate resolution given the significant security breach that occurred through Ms. Lewis's credentials. Lauren opened a folder, removing several documents. Before we continue, I'd like to introduce some new information. First, the district attorney's formal statement clearing Ms. Lewis of any criminal involvement or knowledge. She slid the document across the table. Second, an expert analysis of hospital security protocols that identifies systemic vulnerabilities in the medication tracking system. Vulnerabilities that were exploited by Dennis Matheson and Ryan Blackwell. This second document, commissioned by Lauren at considerable expense, was their strategic gambit. Julia watched as Powell skimmed it, his expression carefully neutral. Interesting reading, he said finally, but it doesn't change the fact that Ms. Lewis's credentials were compromised. It contextualizes that compromise within a larger system failure, Lauren countered. One that the hospital might prefer not to have examined too closely in a public forum. The implication hung in the air. Push Julia out, and this report might find its way to the press, raising questions about the hospital's own negligence. We're also prepared to present evidence at the nursing board hearing that several other staff members have experienced similar credential theft without facing termination, Lauren continued. Creating what could be argued is a pattern of selective enforcement against Ms. Lewis. Powell exchanged glances with Marion Chun from HR, who had remained silent thus far. What exactly are you proposing? He asked. Ms. Lewis returns to work, but in a different unit, pediatric outpatient care, perhaps. She accepts a formal reprimand in her file and agrees to complete additional security training. The hospital acknowledges her 9 years of exemplary service and recognizes that she was a victim of a sophisticated criminal scheme. That's a non-starter, Chun interjected. We cannot simply consider the alternatives, Lauren interrupted smoothly. A contested termination. A nursing board hearing where Boston Memorial's security practices will be scrutinized. Potential media coverage focusing on how the hospital is punishing a victim while failing to address its own systemic vulnerabilities. All while public sympathy continues to build for Ms. Lewis and her son. Julia watched the calculations play out across Powell's face. The hospital had likely assumed she would accept the settlement offer, lacking the resources or will to fight. They hadn't counted on the support network that had emerged, her nursing colleagues who had contributed to a legal fund, the patients' families who had written letters of support, Detective Morgan's unwavering advocacy. Most of all, they hadn't counted on Nathan's simple conviction that standing up for the truth was worth the struggle. We might be able to consider a modified arrangement, Powell said finally. Ms. Lewis would return in a provisional capacity with a 6-month probationary period. She would be assigned to a unit where medication access is more limited, such as outpatient care or education. And her record? Lauren pressed. A note regarding the security breach, but framed as a learning opportunity rather than a disciplinary action. Lauren turned to Julia, raising an eyebrow in silent question. Was this enough? It wasn't complete vindication, but it was far better than resignation or termination. It was a path back to the career she loved, the work that defined her. I can accept those terms, Julia said, her voice steady. With one addition. I'd like to be part of the hospital's review of security protocols. My experience gives me a unique perspective on vulnerabilities that could help prevent similar breaches in the future. Powell looked surprised by the request, then thoughtful. That's actually not a bad idea. I'll propose it to the committee. Then I believe we have an agreement in principle, Lauren said, making notes on her legal pad. We'll draft the formal terms for review. As the meeting concluded with handshakes and cautious smiles, Julia felt a surge of vindication. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be whispers and sideways glances, the weight of the incident following her through hospital corridors for some time. But she had preserved her career and her dignity. More importantly, she had shown Nathan that justice, while imperfect and hard-won, was worth fighting for. Outside, Boston was transformed by a fresh snowfall, the afternoon sun creating diamond-like sparkles across unblemished white surfaces. Julia stood for a moment on the office building steps, turning her face toward the weak December sunlight. We did it, Lauren said, joining her. Not a perfect victory, but a significant one. Thank you, Julia replied with genuine gratitude. I couldn't have done this without you. You did the hard part, Lauren assured her, standing firm when it would have been easier to walk away. She checked her watch. I need to get back upstairs for another meeting. We'll talk tomorrow about next steps for the nursing board hearing. But after today, I'm feeling optimistic. As Lauren returned to her office, Julia remained on the steps, savoring the moment of triumph. Small though it might seem in the grand scheme of things, it represented a turning point, the first step in reclaiming her life from the chaos Dennis had created. Her phone chimed with a text from her mother. Nathan's chess club won their first tournament match. He's ecstatic. How did your meeting go? Julia smiled, typing back. We won our match too. Tell him I'm bringing home celebration pizza. She pocketed her phone and headed toward her car, her steps lighter than they had been in weeks. The winter sunlight caught the snowflakes still falling intermittently, transforming them briefly into prisms of light before they joined their fellows on the ground. Like those snowflakes, Julia thought, individual moments of justice might seem small and fleeting, but together they could transform an entire landscape. Spring came to Boston with a gentle insistence that surprised even the most winter-weary residents. Crocuses pushed through the soil in tiny bursts of purple and yellow, trees budded with tender green, and the air carried the promise of renewal. 6 months had passed since Dennis's sentencing, and in the Lewis household, life had found a new rhythm. Nathan stood at the kitchen counter, carefully arranging cookies on a platter while his mother finished getting dressed upstairs. Today marked a milestone they had both been anticipating for weeks, Julia's first day back at Boston Memorial Hospital after successfully defending her nursing license before the state board. The celebration was small but significant. A few of Julia's closest colleagues coming over for an afternoon gathering before she officially returned to work the next day. "Need any help?" Grandmother Elaine asked, entering the kitchen with a vase of fresh daffodils. "I'm almost done," Nathan replied, his expression serious as he considered the cookie arrangement. "Do you think we need more?" "This looks perfect," Elaine assured him, placing the flowers at the center of the dining table. "Your mother will be touched by all your effort." Nathan nodded, satisfied. At 9 now, his birthday had passed in February with a small party at the Science Museum. He had grown noticeably in the months since their ordeal began. Not just physically, though he had shot up an inch and his face had thinned slightly, losing some of its childish roundness. There was a new maturity in his eyes, a thoughtfulness beyond his years that both worried and impressed the adults in his life. Julia appeared in the doorway, wearing a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes. Her hair, which she had let grow out over the winter, was pulled back in a loose braid. "The house looks wonderful," she said, taking in the flowers, the cookies, the handmade congratulations banner Nathan had spent hours creating. "It was mostly Nathan," Elaine said, smiling proudly at her grandson. "He's been planning this celebration for days." Julia crossed to the counter and wrapped her son in a hug. "Thank you, my amazing boy. This means so much to me." Nathan returned the embrace, then pulled back to look at her. "Are you nervous about going back?" Julia considered the question with the honesty they had established between them, a commitment to truth that had become foundational in their healing. "A little," she admitted. "Things will be different in the outpatient clinic. New colleagues, new routines. But you'll still be helping kids," Nathan pointed out. "Just not the really sick ones in the hospital beds." "That's right. I'll be seeing children who are recovering from illnesses or managing chronic conditions. It's important work. And someday you might go back to the intensive care unit," Nathan added. "Once everyone sees what a good nurse you are." Julia smiled, though her eyes reflected a hint of the pain they had weathered. "Maybe. For now, I'm grateful to be working at all. Many nurses in similar situations have lost their licenses entirely." The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of their first guests. "I'll get it," Nathan volunteered, hurrying from the kitchen. He opened the front door to find Detective Morgan, James, as he now insisted Nathan call him, holding a gift bag. Right on time, Nathan greeted him with the phrase he'd picked up from their regular chess matches over the past few months. "A detective is never late," James replied with mock seriousness, stepping inside. He had become a steady presence in their lives, his initial professional interest in the case evolving into genuine friendship. Twice a month, he met Nathan at the library for chess and conversations that sometimes touched on criminal investigation techniques, but just as often explored Nathan's growing interest in astronomy or the detective's recommendations for mystery novels. "Is that James?" Julia called from the kitchen. "It is," James confirmed, entering the living room where Julia and Elaine were arranging drinks on a tray, reporting for duty and bearing gifts. He handed the bag to Julia, who opened it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For your new chapter," he explained. "Professional and personal." "It's lovely," Julia said sincerely. "Thank you for coming today, and for everything else these past months." The doorbell chimed again, and soon the modest house on Willow Street filled with guests. Nurses from Julia's former unit who had advocated for her throughout the ordeal, Lauren Diaz who had fought so effectively for her professional standing, and even Jack, Nathan's chess club friend, whose mother had dropped him off to keep Nathan company amid the adult gathering. As the adults congregated in the living room, Nathan led Jack to his bedroom, where his telescope now stood permanently positioned near the window. "Did you finish that star chart you were working on?" Jack asked, adjusting his glasses as he surveyed Nathan's room. "Almost," Nathan replied, pulling a large poster board from behind his desk. On it, he had meticulously mapped the constellations visible from his window during different seasons, with detailed notes about each major star and its characteristics. "This is amazing," Jack said with genuine admiration. You should show this at the science fair next month. Maybe. Nathan set the chart aside and sat on his bed. I was thinking of doing something different, though. Like what? Nathan hesitated, suddenly unsure about sharing the idea that had been forming in his mind for weeks. I was thinking about a project on evidence collection. You know, how police detectives gather information to solve crimes. Jack's eyes widened with interest. Because of what happened with your stepdad? Sort of. Nathan reached under his pillow and pulled out a small leather notebook, a gift from James on his birthday. He opened it to reveal pages of carefully documented observations about his neighborhood. Times when certain neighbors left for work, patterns of delivery trucks, unusual activities on their street. I've been practicing observation skills. Whoa! Jack breathed, clearly impressed. You're like a real detective. Not yet, Nathan corrected. But someday, maybe. James says the most important quality in a detective is paying attention to details others miss. Like you did with your other notebook? The one about Dennis. Nathan nodded. That was just me writing down stuff that seemed weird. I didn't know what it meant, but it ended up being important evidence. My mom says you're the bravest kid she knows, Jack said matter-of-factly, for calling 911 that night. Nathan considered this. I was scared, he admitted. But sometimes you have to do the right thing even when you're scared. That's what my mom says. A knock at the bedroom door interrupted their conversation. Julia poked her head in. Boys, we're having cake in the dining room if you'd like to join us. As they followed her down the hallway, Nathan noticed his mother's posture. Straighter than it had been in months, her step lighter. The weight of uncertainty had lifted, and though there were still challenges ahead, the worst was behind them. In the dining room, James was sharing an animated story with the gathered nurses, his hands gesturing expressively as he described a case he had worked on years earlier. Lauren Diaz was deep in conversation with Elaine, their heads bent together as they discussed the community garden project they had both become involved with over the winter. These people, Nathan realized, had become their constellation. Points of light connected by the experience they had shared and the support they had offered when it mattered most. Julia called for everyone's attention, holding up her glass of sparkling cider. I want to thank you all for coming today, and for standing by us through what has been the most challenging period of our lives. Murmurs of support rippled through the small crowd. When Dennis was arrested 6 months ago, I thought my career was over. I thought our lives had been irreparably damaged by his actions. Julia's voice grew stronger as she continued. What I didn't realize then was that crisis reveals not just vulnerabilities, but strengths you never knew you had. She looked directly at Nathan. I learned that my 9-year-old son possesses more courage and moral clarity than many adults. I learned that true friends stand with you even when it would be easier to step away. Here, here, called one of the nurses, raising her glass. Most importantly, Julia continued, I learned that rebuilding after betrayal is possible. Different, certainly. Challenging, absolutely. But possible. Nathan felt a warm pride spread through his chest. His mother had fought so hard, had refused to accept the easy but unjust path offered by the hospital. She had shown him what it meant to stand up for yourself while maintaining dignity and integrity. To new beginnings, Julia concluded, raising her glass higher. To new beginnings, everyone echoed, Nathan's voice joining the chorus. After cake had been served and the conversations had resumed, Nathan found himself standing near the living room window, watching the afternoon sunlight filter through the newly budded maple tree in their front yard. James approached, carrying a plate with a half-eaten slice of cake. Deep thoughts? The detective asked, following Nathan's gaze outside. I was just thinking about constellations, Nathan replied. The stars, sort of, but also the way people connect. Mom says the people who helped us are like our own personal constellation. James smiled. That's a nice way to think about it. In astronomy class, we learned that some stars that look close together in constellations are actually really far apart in space. Nathan continued. But from Earth, they create patterns that help people navigate. Smart observation, James acknowledged. Perspective matters. That's what I think about Dennis now, Nathan said, lowering his voice slightly. From up close, he seemed like one thing, but when we stepped back, we could see the real pattern. James studied the boy with thoughtful eyes. That's remarkably insightful, Nathan. Most adults struggle to gain that kind of perspective. Nathan shrugged, a little embarrassed by the praise. I still think about him sometimes. Not because I miss him, but because I wonder if there were clues I missed. Things I should have noticed sooner. Listen to me, James said, his tone gentle but firm. What Dennis did was not your responsibility to uncover. The fact that you noticed anything unusual at all and documented it in your notebook shows extraordinary awareness for someone your age. You did everything right. But if I had shown Mom my notebook earlier, we can't rewrite the past with what-ifs, James interrupted kindly. That path leads nowhere useful. What matters is how we move forward with the knowledge we have now. Nathan considered this wisdom. Like Mom going back to nursing, but in a different way? Exactly. She's taking what she learned from this experience and finding a new path that honors her skills and values. A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched the gathering from their quiet corner. Julia was laughing at something one of her colleagues had said. Her face animated in a way Nathan hadn't seen in months. Grandmother Elaine was distributing cookies, her perpetual nurturing extending to everyone in their home. James, Nathan said after a moment. Is it okay that part of me is glad this happened? The detective looked surprised. What do you mean? Not the bad parts, Nathan clarified quickly. Not Dennis stealing medicine or Mom losing her job temporarily. But, he struggled to articulate the complex feeling. If none of it had happened, Dennis would still be living with us, stealing from the hospital. Mom wouldn't know the truth, and you wouldn't be teaching me chess. James considered this thoughtfully. I think that's a remarkably healthy perspective, Nathan. Finding value in difficult experiences doesn't mean you're glad for the pain they caused. It means you're learning to integrate those experiences into your understanding of life. Like making a new constellation from stars that were always there, but you just hadn't connected them before, Nathan suggested. Exactly like that. James smiled with genuine admiration. You know, with that kind of thinking, you'd make an exceptional detective someday. Nathan felt a pleasant warmth at the compliment. Really, detectives need more than just observational skills. They need empathy, resilience, and the ability to find meaning in chaos. You've demonstrated all of those qualities. Before Nathan could respond, Julia approached, her expression curious. What are you two conspiring about over here? Constellations and careers, James replied cryptically. Your son has some fascinating insights about both. That doesn't surprise me in the least, Julia said, resting a hand on Nathan's shoulder. He's been my guiding star through all of this. Nathan felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment, though the pride in his mother's voice filled him with quiet joy. Mom, he said, changing the subject. Can Jack stay for dinner after everyone leaves? His mom said it was okay if you agreed. Of course, Julia replied. In fact, why don't we order pizza? A proper celebration. As Nathan hurried off to tell Jack the good news, Julia turned to James. Thank you for being such a positive presence in his life. These past months would have been so much harder without your support. He's an extraordinary kid, James said simply. And you're an extraordinary mother. What you've both been through would have broken many people, but instead you've emerged stronger. Not unscathed, Julia qualified. There are still nights when I wake up questioning my judgment, wondering how I could have been so thoroughly deceived. That's natural, James assured her. Trust is built on experience. Dennis manipulated that experience, creating a false reality you had every reason to believe was genuine. The hospital ethics committee still sees it as a failure of professional responsibility, Julia said, though without the bitterness that had once accompanied such observations. And perhaps there's some truth to that. I should have been more careful with my credentials. Context matters, James countered. You were a single mother working exhausting shifts, trying to create a stable home for your son. Dennis exploited those circumstances deliberately. Julia nodded, accepting this perspective that had taken months of therapy to begin integrating. The new position in outpatient care is actually proving to be a blessing in disguise. More regular hours, less physical and emotional exhaustion. More time with Nathan, James added. Yes, that most of all. Julia's gaze drifted to where her son stood with Jack, examining the star chart he had brought out to show his friend. He's changed so much through all this. Grown up faster than I would have wished. Children are resilient, especially when they have consistent support. And Nathan has never lacked for that. The gathering continued into early evening, the conversation flowing easily among people united by their connection to the Lewis family's journey. As the sun began to set, guests gradually departed with warm hugs and promises to stay in touch. James was the last to leave, pausing at the door to hand Nathan a book on famous criminal investigations adapted for young readers. Homework for our next chess match, he said with a wink. I expect a full report. Nathan accepted the book with solemn appreciation. I'll be prepared. When only the Lewis family remained, plus Jack who was staying for pizza, Julia looked around at their home. Truly theirs again, reclaimed from the shadow Dennis had cast. The painful memories had not disappeared, but they had been incorporated into a larger narrative of resilience and growth. Mom, Nathan said as they cleared away the party remnants together. Are you happy? The directness of the question, so characteristic of her son, made Julia pause. I am, she said after a moment of genuine reflection. Not in the same way I thought I was when Dennis was here. That happiness was built on deception. This feels more authentic, even with its complications. I'm happy too, Nathan confirmed, as if concluding an important investigation. I like our constellation. Julia smiled, recognizing the metaphor they had discussed earlier. So do I, sweetheart. So do I. Later that night, after Jack had gone home and the house was quiet, Julia stood in the doorway of Nathan's bedroom, watching him sleep. His astronomy books were stacked neatly on his desk, alongside the detective novel James had given him and his observation notebook. The star chart he had created was now tacked to his wall, a testament to his methodical mind and his enduring fascination with patterns in the seemingly chaotic universe. On his bedside table sat a framed photograph, not of their former family unit with Dennis, but a new image captured at Nathan's birthday celebration at the Science Museum. It showed Nathan flanked by Julia and Elaine, with James standing slightly behind them, all smiling genuinely beneath the museum's massive planetary display. A new family constellation, formed not by biology or legal documents, but by choice and shared experience. Julia gently closed his door and made her way to her own bedroom, where her nursing uniform hung ready for the morning. Tomorrow she would return to the work she loved, changed but not diminished by what she had endured. She would carry with her the lessons of the past months, about vigilance and vulnerability, about resilience and recovery, about the extraordinary strength that can emerge from ordinary lives when tested by extraordinary circumstances. Outside Nathan's window, the spring sky revealed its own constellations, ancient patterns of light traveling across unimaginable distances to create a map that had guided humans for millennia. Inside, a boy who had once used his powers of observation to unveil a criminal now dreamed of using those same skills to help others, to bring order to chaos, to transform the random points of human experience into meaningful patterns of justice. And in this quiet moment of transition between what had been and what would be, mother and son, separated by walls but connected by an unbreakable bond of love and shared survival, found themselves exactly where they needed to be, facing forward, together, navigating by stars of their own making.